She was 19, a rising martial arts star groomed to be the next queen of action. But in one night, Rose Chan's career was destroyed not by a failed stunt, but by 120 paparazzi photos. They captured her frozen in terror as two of Hong Kong's biggest nice guys, Benny Chan and Joe Ma, assaulted her in plain sight. Yet the ultimate betrayal wasn't the attack. It was seeing her abuser drag his pregnant wife onto a stage to beg for mercy, turning the victim into the villain in the eyes of the public. This manipulation was only possible because the perpetrators were not seen as monsters, but as legends. For decades, they had blurred the line between their noble on-screen personas and their hidden realities. Behind the myth lay a contrasting reality. Benny Chan Ho Man was born on October 7, 1969. By 2011, the 42-year-old veteran had spent 2 decades cultivating an image of harmless, boyish charm. His breakout role in the 1997 classic Demigods and Semi-Devils didn't just make him a star, it made him a symbol of virtue. For the public, Benny Chan was Duan Yu, the loyal, gentle prince. This image was his greatest asset and his most dangerous weapon. It provided him with a zone of safety where no one could imagine him capable of malice. Standing beside him was Joe Ma Tak-chung, born on June 27, 1968. At 43, Ma was the rugged counterpart to Chan's boyishness. A former real-life police officer from the elite G4 protection unit, Ma's career was built on playing heroes, protectors, and men of iron discipline. Together, these two men represented the peak of TVB's patriarchal power. They were the seniors, the big brothers who commanded absolute respect from everyone beneath them in the industry's rigid hierarchy. Their target that night was Rose Chan Ka-woon. Born on November 8, 1992, she had turned 19 just 11 days before her life was upended. Rose was a unique figure in the industry, the protégé of Sin Kwok Lam, a formidable Wing Chun master and a powerful producer. She was being groomed as the next great action queen of Hong Kong cinema. She was young, physically strong, and trained in combat. On paper, she was a woman who could defend herself. But in the predatory ecosystem of Hengdian World Studios, physical strength means nothing when weighed against the crushing force of industry seniority and social status. The setting for this tragedy was a late-night skewer stall in Hengdian, Zhejiang. The cast and crew of Princess and the Seven Kung Fu Masters had gathered to unwind after a long day of filming. Hengdian is a world of its own, a sprawling, lawless film city where the usual rules of society often feel distant. As the night wore on and the alcohol flowed, the protective barriers around Rose began to dissolve. When her most senior protector, actor Timmy Hung, collapsed into a drunken stupor at the table, a power vacuum was created. Rose was left as the only young woman among a group of intoxicated, powerful men who viewed her not as a colleague, but as prey. What followed was captured in 120 frame-by-frame images that would haunt the industry for years. The photos show the slow-motion anatomy of an assault. It began with Benny Chan testing the boundaries, an arm around the waist, a whisper too close to the ear, a glass of wine pushed too insistently. In the photos, Rose is seen with a frozen, polite smile, the social mask of a junior girl terrified of offending her idols. But the escalation was swift and brutal. The camera caught Benny Chan lunging at the 19-year-old, his hands groping her chest while his other hand clamped firmly over her mouth. Far from playful behavior, this was a physical silencing. He pinned her down, forcing kisses upon her, while she recoiled, her face flushed with panic, her eyes squeezed shut in a desperate attempt to disappear. And through it all, the hero Joe Ma did not move a finger to help. Instead, the photos show him leaning in, joining the fray, his arms wrapping around the trembling girl in what can only be described as a coordinated act of intimidation. The shock waves that hit Hong Kong the next morning were unlike anything the city had seen. The idol was dead, the predator was exposed. But as the public began to demand justice, Benny Chan was already preparing his most cynical performance yet. He realized that the only way to survive the 120 photos was to create a spectacle even more emotional than the assault itself. He didn't just need a lawyer, he needed his pregnant wife. He needed to turn a story of sexual violence into a story of family redemption, and in doing so, he would trap Rose Chan in a cage of public sympathy that she could never escape. This crime was the product of a specific environment, Hengdian World Studios, known as the Hollywood of the East, and the mind dissociates from the reality of the trauma. Rose Chan described this sensation perfectly in her later statements. I was so scared at that time, my limbs were stiff. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, but I couldn't move. This reaction is rarely a choice. It is a neurological override. The sheer shock of the situation, the cognitive dissonance of seeing her respected senior brothers transform into groping monsters, short-circuited her ability to react. Her brain could not reconcile the Duan Yu she grew up watching with the sweaty, aggressive man pinning her down. In that gap of confusion, the freeze took hold. The assault itself was insidious in its pacing. Unlike a sudden, violent blow that triggers a fight reflex, this was a slow boil. It began with a touch on the shoulder, a whisper, a joke. It escalated incrementally. This is a common grooming tactic. If Benny Chan had punched her, she likely would have blocked it. That is a physical threat her body understands. But sexual harassment often masquerades as intimacy. It confuses the victim's radar. Is he just being friendly? Is this how drunk uncles behave? By the time she realized the friendliness was actually an assault, she was already physically pinned and psychologically cornered. Compounding this paralysis was the good girl conditioning that pervades Asian culture. Girls like Rose are raised to be polite, to be accommodating, and to avoid conflict at all costs. To reject an elder's affection is considered rude. To embarrass a man in public is a cardinal sin. Even as her boundaries were being obliterated, Rose was likely trying to find a polite way to escape, a way to say no without bruising the fragile egos of the powerful men around her. She was trying to de-escalate the situation with a smile, hoping they would stop on their own. Benny Chan and Jo Ma exploited this kindness. They weaponized her politeness against her. They saw her frozen state not as a sign of terror, but as a green light to proceed. They mistook her paralysis for submission, or perhaps they simply didn't care to know the difference. Ultimately, the argument that Rose Chan should have fought back is the ultimate fallacy of the armchair critic. It ignores the intoxicating power of seniority in the showbiz hierarchy. It ignores the biological reality of trauma. On that night in Hengdian, Rose Chan was not a martial arts warrior. She was a teenager, alone in a foreign environment, surrounded by drunk, powerful men, paralyzed by a cocktail of fear, duty, and shock. She didn't fight back because the system was designed to ensure she couldn't. And as the camera shutters of the paparazzi clicked in the distance, capturing her terror frame by frame, the world was about to see exactly what happens when a lamb is thrown to the wolves. In the shadowy history of celebrity scandals, the camera lens is usually viewed as a weapon of intrusion, a vulgar tool used to steal privacy for profit. But in the case of Rose Chan, the camera played a radically different role. It became the sole, impartial witness to a crime that otherwise would have been buried under the weight of power and denial. On the night of November 19, 2011, Photographers from Oriental Sunday were staked out in the bushes of Hengdian, hoping for a glimpse of a secret romance or a drunken stumble. Instead, they captured something far darker. They captured a frame-by-frame documentation of a sexual assault. The resulting 120 photographs act as a horrifying flipbook of predation. They do not just show us what happened, they show us how it happened. They reveal the pacing, the escalation, and the terrifying mechanics of a group assault. A forensic analysis of these images reveals the depth of the violation, treating them not as gossip, but as evidence of a crime in progress. The sequence begins deceptively. In the early frames, the atmosphere at the plastic table appears chaotic, but convivial. The table is littered with empty beer bottles and discarded skewers, the detritus of a long night. Here we see the first tactical moves of Benny Chan. He is seated next to Rose, his posture loose and sprawling. He begins what experts in predatory behavior call boundary testing. He leans in, he places a hand on her shoulder, he whispers something into her ear. A close examination of Rose Chan's face in these early frames reveals the beginning of the tragedy. She is smiling, but it is not a smile of enjoyment. It is a social grimace, tight, forced, and lacking the eye crinkling that signifies genuine mirth. Her body is listing away from him, her spine pressing against the far side of her chair. She is employing the only defense mechanism a junior is taught in this industry: polite deflection. She's trying to manage the senior's drunkenness without causing a scene. She is hoping that if she tolerates the hand on the shoulder, it won't move lower. Hengdian is a sprawling landscape of imperial palaces and ancient streets. But for Hong Kong actors, it was a lawless frontier town, a gold rush territory where oversight was non-existent and the strict social rules of Hong Kong dissolved into the cold night air. Crossing the border into mainland China was akin to stepping into a different dimension. In Hong Kong, Benny Chan and Joe Ma lived under the microscope of the paparazzi. But in the pre-smartphone era of 2011, Hengdian felt like a private playground. Here, the big brothers operated with a colonial mindset, believing their status gave them diplomatic immunity. If Hengdian was the kingdom, the dinner table was the throne room. Rose Chan's presence was dictated by the industry's rigid, almost feudal hierarchy. In this ecosystem, an invitation from a big brother, Daigo, is not a request, it is a professional command. Rose, trained in the strict codes of martial arts, walked into that restaurant not as a woman going to a party, but as a junior soldier reporting for duty. She brought with her the good girl conditioning that predators find so easy to exploit. The setting provided a grotesque camouflage for the predation. A local skewer stall with harsh fluorescent lighting, thick charcoal smoke, and plastic stools. It felt safe, public, and informal. As beer and baijiu crowded the table, the alcohol stripped away the men's moral inhibitors, while creating a chaotic fog around the victim. Crucially, the safety valve failed. Rose's chaperone, Timmy Hung, had collapsed into a drunken stupor, effectively creating a power vacuum. As the night wore on, the crew and assistants, sensing the danger of witnessing their boss's bad behavior, quietly vanished. By 1 a.m., an invisible cage had been constructed. The protector was unconscious. The witnesses were gone. The hunt was about to begin. In the days following the publication of the 120 scandalous photographs, a cruel and persistent question circulated through the tea houses and internet forums of Hong Kong. It was a question born of ignorance, yet it cut to the heart of the victim-blaming culture that surrounds sexual assault. The question was this: Rose Chan is a martial artist. She is a trained disciple of Wing Chun. If she was truly being harassed, why didn't she just beat them up? Why didn't she break their arms? To the casual observer, It seemed like a logical contradiction. On screen, Rose Chan was marketed as the next Michelle Yeoh, a warrior woman fierce and untouchable. But real life is not a kung fu movie. In the real world, the dynamics of power are far heavier than any punch, and the chains of social expectation are stronger than any grappling hold. Why did Rose Chan sit frozen in that chair while two men violated her personal space? The answer lies beyond her physical training, deep within the psychological prison constructed around her. Rose Chan was more than an actress. She served as a symbol. As the cherished disciple of Sin Kwok Lam, a legendary figure in the martial arts world and a powerful producer, she carried the weight of her master's reputation on her 19-year-old shoulders. In the traditional Chinese martial arts community, the bond between master and disciple is sacred, akin to father and child. But it also comes with a rigid code of conduct, discipline, restraint, and above all, faith. Rose was raised in a system that taught her that her actions were a direct reflection of her teacher. To cause a scene, to flip a table, or to strike a senior actor in a public restaurant would not just be a personal outburst. It would be viewed as a catastrophic loss of face for her master. It would be seen as unruly, disrespectful, and lacking in cultivation. So, when the harassment began, Rose was not calculating a counterattack. She was calculating the social cost of resistance. Her internal monologue was likely a frantic, terrifying loop. If I scream, will I ruin the production? If I hit him, will I be blacklisted? If I make a scene, will Master Sin be ashamed of me? These questions are the shackles that bind victims in the entertainment industry. The predators, Benny Chan and Joe Ma, instinctively understood this. They knew that her training was neutralized by her deference. They knew she was trapped not by physical weakness, but by professional fear. But there is a deeper, more primal biological mechanism at play here, one that silencing critics often ignore: the freeze response. When a human being is faced with a sudden, overwhelming threat, the brain's amygdala, the fear center, takes over. We are commonly taught about fight or flight, but there is a third, equally common response: freeze. This is also known as tonic immobility. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism observed in prey animals. When escape seems impossible and fighting seems futile, the body shuts down. The limbs become heavy, the voice gets stuck in the throat. She is hoping that if she laughs at the joke, he will pull back. But predators do not read polite deflection as a stop sign. They read it as a yield sign. The lack of a firm, shouting rejection, which Rose was too terrified to give, was interpreted by Benny Chan as permission to proceed. The photos show the distance between them shrinking frame by frame. The safe zone of personal space is eroded until it ceases to exist. As the timeline progresses into the deep hours of the morning, the pretense of friendly advice is abandoned. The images captured during the peak of the assault are visceral and difficult to look at. Benny Chan, emboldened by the alcohol and Rose's frozen state, launches a physical offensive that is shocking in its crudeness. One particularly damning sequence shows Benny Chan forcefully grabbing Rose's hand and pulling her arm towards him, treating her limb like an object to be possessed. But he does not stop there. The camera captures his hand snaking around her waist, moving upwards to grope her chest. The intrusion is undeniable. There is no angle, no trick of the light that can explain away a hand grasping a woman's breast in a public restaurant. However, amidst these images of groping, there is one specific gesture that stands out as the definitive proof of non-consent. It is the image that destroyed Benny Chan's defense before he could even mount it. In a series of rapid-fire shots, Benny Chan is seen raising his hand to Rose's face. He does not cup her cheek in affection. He clamps his hand firmly, violently, over her mouth and nose. The implications of this specific act are clear. A man covers a woman's mouth during a kiss for only one reason: to silence her, to prevent her from screaming, to stop her from saying no. It is an act of total domination. It transforms the interaction from a drunken pass into a hostage situation. In those grainy, high-contrast photos, Rose's head is forced back against the headrest of the chair. Her eyes are squeezed shut in a grimace of sheer repulsion. Her eyebrows are knitted together in distress. She is being suffocated and assaulted simultaneously. This mouth-covering gesture is the smoking gun. It visually screams that she was resisting, that she was trying to speak, and that she was physically overpowered. It strips away the lie that she was a willing participant or a seducer. Seducers do not need to be gagged. While Benny Chan played the role of the aggressor, the camera lens reveals a truth about Jo-ma Tak-chung that is perhaps even more disturbing. For years, Jo-ma had built a brand on playing the stoic hero, the righteous police officer, the protector of the weak. But the 120 photos reveal him as the ultimate enabler, the wingman, in the worst possible sense of the word. In the composition of the photographs, Jo-ma is the second wall of the cage. He is seated on the other side of Rose, effectively blocking her exit. If she turns away from Benny, she faces Jo. Jo-ma's defenders initially claimed he was merely a bystander or perhaps too drunk to notice. The photos prove this to be a lie. Jo-ma is not looking away. He is not slumped over like Timmy Hung. He is hyper-focused on the assault. And he is participating. As Benny Chan mauls Rose from the left, Jo-ma is seen leaning in from the right. He wraps an arm around her neck. He brings his face mere inches from hers. In some frames, he appears to be whispering to her. In others, he seems to be enjoying the spectacle, smiling a dark, predatory smile. This is a classic tag team dynamic. By encroaching on her space, by touching her, by refusing to intervene, Jo-ma validated Benny Chan's behavior. He signaled to Benny, "This is okay. I am with you. Proceed." There is a psychological torture in this two-pronged attack. If Jo-ma had been a neutral observer, Rose might have appealed to him for help. She might have shouted, "Sai-heen Jo, help me." But because he was joining in, because he was leaning in with that same glazed, lustful look, Rose realized there was no help coming. The man who should have been her savior was just another wolf. The despair on her face in the photos where both men are touching her is palpable. It is the look of someone who realizes they are completely alone. The timeline of the assault is equally damning. These 120 photos were not taken in a burst of 5 seconds. Paparazzi photography is opportunistic. They snap, they wait, they snap again. The sheer volume of images implies that this assault went on for a significant duration. It was a siege. This was not a fleeting mistake where a man tripped and fell onto a woman. This was a sustained campaign of harassment. Rose was subjected to wave after wave of violation. She would push Benny away and he would return. She would turn her head and Jo would pull her back. She would try to stand and they would crowd her. The persistence of the predators is chilling. It speaks to a deep sense of entitlement, the belief that they had all night, that no one would stop them, that her no was irrelevant because their desire was paramount. The photos also capture the environment's indifference. In the background of some wide shots, we see blurry figures, other patrons, restaurant staff. They are eating, drinking, looking at their phones. No one is looking at the table where a girl is being pinned down. This bystander effect is captured on film, a stinging indictment of the culture of silence. The assault happened in the open, yet it happened in a bubble of invisibility. The final sequence of photos shows the aftermath. The energy at the table has shifted. The predators appear satisfied, perhaps exhausted by their exertion. But it is the image of Rose Chan that lingers longest in the memory. She looks shattered. Her hair is disheveled. Her face is blotchy and swollen, likely from suppressed tears and the friction of unwanted contact. Her posture has collapsed. She is slumped in the chair, staring at the table or into the middle distance with a hollow, 1,000-yard stare. It is the body language of dissociation. The freeze response has given way to a profound, crushing shame. In these final frames, we do not see the action queen or the Wing Chun disciple. We see a traumatized teenager who has just learned a brutal lesson about the reality of her industry. She looks small. She looks broken. When Oriental Sunday published these images with the headline "Wolf Kiss" and "Devil's Claws," they did not need to use sensationalist adjectives. The pictures spoke a language that was universal. They bypassed the PR spin, the lawyer's denials, and the fan club's defenses. Benny Chan could say, "I was just being playful." But the photo of his hand clamping over her mouth said, "You were silencing her." Jo Ma could say, "I was comforting her." But the photo of his arm locking her neck said, "You were trapping her." These 120 frames are a testament to the power of visual evidence. In an industry where sexual harassment is often dismissed as "he said, she said," these photos provided the "it happened." They forced the public to confront the reality of predatory behavior without the filter of doubt. They are not just photos of a celebrity scandal. They are a crime scene investigation developed in a dark room, proving that even the most beloved Duan Yu can hide a monster beneath the mask. When the camera shutter clicks, the event is frozen in time, but the war for the truth is just beginning. In the immediate aftermath of the Hengdian incident, before the ink on the pages of Oriental Sunday was even dry, Benny Chan and Jo Ma initiated a secondary assault on Rose Chan. This second attack left no physical bruises, but it was designed to inflict a far more insidious kind of damage. It was a psychological offensive known as gaslighting, a systematic attempt to distort reality, minimize the violence, and make the victim question her own memory of the trauma. If the dinner table was the crime scene, the press statements that followed were the cover-up. The initial reaction of a predator caught in the act is almost always a reflexive, absolute denial. Before the full extent of the photographic evidence was known to him, Benny Chan operated with the arrogance of a man who believed his reputation was bulletproof. When rumors of the incident first began to circulate, whispers of a drunken mistake reaching the Hong Kong press, Benny's response was not one of humility but of defiant dismissal. He told reporters with a straight face, "I did not do anything. I was just being hospitable." He invoked the sanctity of his marriage as a shield, stating, "I love my wife very much. I would not do anything to hurt her." This initial strategy reveals his mindset. He was attempting to frame the narrative before the evidence could speak. By claiming he was merely hospitable, he was already planting the seeds of doubt. He was suggesting that any physical contact was merely the warmth of a senior welcoming a junior, and that any perception of impropriety was a misunderstanding by sensitive observers. This is the first step of the Darvo tactic. Deny the abuse ever happened. However, this strategy collapsed the moment the 120 photographs hit the newsstands. The sheer volume and graphic nature of the images made total denial impossible. You cannot deny a hand over a mouth. You cannot explain away a forced kiss as a handshake. Faced with irrefutable proof, Benny Chan executed a pivot that is a hallmark of the gaslighting machinery. He moved from denial to minimization. He stopped saying, "I didn't do it," and started saying, "I was just playing." In subsequent statements, Benny Chan characterized his actions as overly playful and lacking in propriety due to alcohol. Note the careful choice of words. Playful suggests a game, a mutual exchange of fun where both parties are participants. It implies consent. By labeling a sexual assault as play, he was attempting to rewrite the script of the evening. He was telling the public and Rose that what she experienced as terror was actually just a boisterous joke she didn't get. This is a devastating form of psychological manipulation. It forces the victim to ask, am I overreacting? Was he just being funny? Am I the one ruining the fun? He also leaned heavily on the alcohol defense. He claimed he was too drunk to control himself, that the liquor had turned a gentleman into a fool. This is a classic deflection. In the court of public opinion, drunkenness often serves as a mitigating factor, a get-out-of-jail-free card that separates the sinner from the sin. The narrative became, Benny isn't a predator, he's just a guy who can't hold his liquor. This effectively stripped the act of its malicious intent, reducing a predatory hunt to a clumsy accident. While Benny Chan was flailing in the spotlight, trying to reshape the truth with clumsy words, Tak-chung was executing a colder, more calculated survival strategy. If Benny was the loud denier, Ma was the slippery evader. The moment the scandal broke, Ma understood that the ship was sinking, and he had no intention of going down with the captain. Ma's strategy was immediate disassociation. Despite the photographic evidence showing him hugging Rose and leaning in to comfort or harass her, he issued a statement that effectively threw Benny Chan to the wolves. He claimed that he was merely a bystander, that he had tried to stop the behavior, a claim directly contradicted by the photos of him smiling and participating, and that his actions were purely intended to comfort Rose. This was a masterclass in rewriting history. Ma positioned himself not as an accomplice, but as a benevolent senior who was checking on the victim. He exploited the ambiguity of the still images to paint himself as the good cop to Benny's bad cop. He played on his public persona as a former police officer, a man of law and order, to insist that he could never be involved in such chaos. His defense was, I was there, but I wasn't with him. This betrayal of his friend Benny Chan was ruthless, but effective. It created a split in the narrative, allowing Ma to drift to the periphery of the scandal while Benny absorbed the full force of the blast. Crucially, both men relied on the silence of the victim. In the days immediately following the leak, they banked on the hope that Rose Chan, a 19-year-old newcomer, would be too terrified to contradict them. They gambled that the industry's code of silence would hold. They were practically daring her to speak up, knowing that if she did, she would be branded a troublemaker. They were gaslighting not just Rose, but the entire Hong Kong public, asking them to disbelieve their own eyes. They asked the world to look at a picture of a woman being gagged and see a picture of friends laughing. This phase of the scandal, the war of words, was perhaps more revealing than the assault itself. It exposed the machinery of power that protects predators. It showed that for men like Benny Chan and Ma, the truth is malleable. They believed that their status, their fan bases, and their carefully crafted reputations were strong enough to crush the reality of a 19-year-old girl. They were trying to normalize the abnormal, to convince the world that the wolf was just a friendly dog and that the sheep was crying wolf. But they had underestimated two things: the resolve of Rose's master, Sin Kwok Lam, and the sheer undeniable horror of the photographs that no amount of spin could erase. The gaslighting had begun, but the grand finale, the ultimate act of emotional manipulation, was yet to come. By November 24, 2011, the walls were closing in on Benny Chan. The denial phase had failed spectacularly. The alcohol defense had been mocked by the public. Most critically, Rose Chan, supported by her furious master Sin Kwok Lam, had escalated the situation from a tabloid scandal to a legal crisis. She had filed a formal report with the Hong Kong police, and Sin Kwok Lam was threatening a lawsuit in mainland China. Benny Chan was no longer just facing a PR disaster. He was facing the potential end of his career and the terrifying prospect of criminal charges. Desperation breeds innovation, and in his darkest hour, Benny Chan and his management team conceived a strategy so cynical, so ethically bankrupt, yet so psychologically effective that it remains a case study in crisis management to this day. They realized that a middle-aged man apologizing for sexual harassment elicits no sympathy, but a broken father weeping for his unborn child, that is a narrative the public might buy. And so, they prepared the stage for the ultimate piece of theater. They decided to deploy a weapon that Rose Chan could not possibly fight against, a heavily pregnant woman. The press conference was held in Kwun Tong. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Dozens of reporters and photographers crammed into the venue expecting a standard apology, but what they saw when the doors opened made the room fall silent. Benny Chan walked in, dressed in a somber black suit, looking haggard and broken. But he was not alone. Walking slowly beside him, needing physical support, was his wife, Lisa Zhang Lisha. At this moment, Lisa was not just a wife. She was a visual prop of devastating power. She was 9 months pregnant. Her due date was mere days away. Her belly was prominent, a stark, undeniable symbol of life, fragility, and family. Bringing a woman in her condition into the flashing lights of a media scrum was an act of recklessness, but it was a calculated recklessness. Benny Chan was effectively saying to the world, "Look at what this scandal is doing to us. Look at the innocent life hanging in the balance." The performance that followed was a calculated display of emotional manipulation. Benny Chan did not stand tall and admit his crimes with dignity. Instead, he collapsed. He wept uncontrollably, his shoulders shaking, tears streaming down his face. He bowed not once but 3 times, folding his body in half in a gesture of absolute submission. It was a display of abject misery designed to trigger a primal human instinct, pity. Yet the specific wording of his apology is revealing. While he addressed Rose Chan, the emotional core of his speech remained firmly centered on himself and his family. "I have done wrong," he sobbed. "I have disappointed my wife. I have disappointed my fans. I am afraid." The narrative was shifting in real time. He was reframing the assault not as a violation of a young girl's rights, but as a tragedy that had befallen his household. He was the sinner, yes, but he was also the suffering protagonist. Then came the climax of the show. Lisa Zhang Lisha, the woman who had been betrayed, the woman who should have been the one furious at her husband, took the microphone, tears rolling down her cheeks. She did the unthinkable. She begged for him. "I hope everyone can give him a chance," she wept, her voice trembling. "He has already admitted his mistake. He knows he was wrong. I hope little sister Rose can forgive him." This moment was the checkmate. This was the trap closing around Rose Chan's neck. By having his pregnant wife beg for mercy, Benny Chan executed a maneuver known as triangulation, or the human shield. He hid behind the sanctity of motherhood. He effectively transferred the burden of morality from himself to his victim. Suddenly, the question was no longer, will Benny Chan pay for his crime? The question became, will Rose Chan destroy this fragile family? This maneuver placed a crushing psychological pressure on the 19-year-old girl. If Rose continued to pursue the lawsuit, if she continued to demand justice, she would no longer be seen just as a victim. She would be seen as the heartless woman who made a pregnant lady cry. She would be the villain pushing a father to prison days before his daughter was born. The public, especially the older, more traditional generation, began to sway. Comments began to appear. For the sake of the child, let it go. He is pathetic enough. Don't drive him to death. The wife is so pitiful. Just forgive him. This is the dark genius of the human shield tactic. It hijacks empathy. It weaponizes the bystander's natural instinct to protect the most vulnerable person in the room. And in that room, the most vulnerable person appeared to be the sobbing pregnant woman, not the teenage martial artist who was assaulted days prior. The visual of the pregnancy trumped the visual of the assault. Lisa Zhang's role in this cannot be overstated. Whether she was coerced, brainwashed, or a willing participant trying to save her family's financial future, she became the primary agent of her husband's salvation. Her presence validated his remorse. If the woman he cheated on could forgive him, who was the public to judge? If the mother of his child stood by him, surely he couldn't be a monster. She laundered his reputation with her own tears. The press conference was a spectacle of white torture. It didn't leave marks, but it suffocated the truth. It turned the aggressor into a tragic figure and the victim into a potential aggressor. It was a cynical gamble that relied on the misogynistic belief that a woman's duty is to forgive, to nurture, and to keep the family intact at all costs. As Benny Chan wailed and Lisa Zhang pleaded, the legal threat from Sin Kwak Lam began to lose its teeth. The court of public opinion had been manipulated. The anger had been diluted by tears. Benny Chan had successfully used his unborn daughter as a bargaining chip to buy his freedom. The cameras flashed, capturing the image of a united, suffering family. And with every flash, the reality of Rose Chan's trauma was pushed further into the shadows, buried under the weight of a performance that was as brilliant as it was despicable. Benny Chan had successfully rebranded himself. The predator was now the penitent father, and the public watched, mesmerized by the show. If the press conference was the explosion, what followed was a slow, suffocating silence. In a just world, the 120 photographs and the police report filed by Rose Chan would have led to a courtroom. We would have seen Benny Chan and Joe Ma stand before a judge to answer for the crime of sexual assault. But the entertainment industry does not operate on the principles of justice. It operates on the principles of leverage, connections, and the preservation of profit. The Rose Chan scandal did not end with a bang of a gavel, but with a whimper of compromise brokered in the back rooms of Hong Kong's elite. Following the spectacle of the Human Shield press conference, the momentum for a legal crusade began to falter. The tears of Benny Chan's pregnant wife had successfully muddied the waters, turning clear-cut victimization into a complex family melodrama. But the final nail in the coffin of justice was hammered in by the invisible hand of the industry. In Hong Kong showbiz, there is a powerful unwritten rule: thou shalt not destroy a money-making tree. Benny Chan and Joe Ma, despite their behavior, were established stars with deep roots in TVB and the lucrative mainland market. Rose Chan, for all her potential, was a newcomer. Behind the scenes, the machinery of influence began to turn. Powerful figures within the industry, senior actors, producers, and executives began to exert pressure. The message whispered to Rose's camp was subtle but clear. He has apologized. His wife is about to give birth. Do not be the one to ruin a family. Do not be too aggressive, or you will have no future in this town. Even Rose's master, Sin Kwak Lam, a man of immense pride and influence, who had initially vowed to fight to the end, found himself trapped in this web of diplomacy. He was furious, yes, but he was also a pragmatic businessman. He understood that dragging two of the industry's biggest names through a messy, years-long criminal trial in mainland China, where the incident occurred, would be a logistical nightmare and a career suicide mission for his disciple. He faced a choice: pursue a Pyrrhic victory that would scorch the earth, or accept a public surrender that preserved Rose's dignity while allowing the industry to move on. And so, the settlement was reached not in a court of law, but in the court of public opinion. On November 25th, just one day after the press conference, Sin Kwok Lam held his own briefing. He announced that because Benny Chan had shown sincere remorse, a remorse bought with his wife's tears, and because Rose Chan was kind-hearted, they would accept the apology. The police report would effectively gather dust. The legal threat was withdrawn. To the public, it looked like forgiveness. To those paying attention, it looked like a forced capitulation. Rose Chan didn't choose to forgive. She was maneuvered into a position where she had no other viable option. However, the injustice of the verdict is most glaring when we look at the disparity in consequences between the two predators. While Benny Chan was forced to humiliate himself publicly to survive, Jo-ma Tak-chung executed an escape act that was nothing short of miraculous. Jo-ma's survival strategy was a study in cold-blooded efficiency. While Benny was crying, Jo-ma was donating. He made a highly publicized donation to the Tonghua group of hospitals, a classic charity wash designed to signal his moral virtue to the community. But his greatest asset was his wife, Janet Ma Zhang Xiaolan. Unlike Lisa Jiang, who played the role of the weeping, submissive victim, Janet Ma was a woman of steel. A highly educated academic with a PhD, she stood by her husband not with tears but with a stoic, ironclad defense. Janet Ma's public stance was brilliant. Rather than begging for mercy, she demanded respect. She accompanied Joe to public events, looking confident and unbothered, projecting an image of a marriage that was unshakable. This signaled to the public, if this strong, intelligent woman stands by him, then surely the incident wasn't that bad. Her strength became his shield. Joe Ma effectively, successfully rebranded his involvement as a misunderstanding, distancing himself from the predator label that stuck to Benny. He retained his contracts, his status as a leading man in TVB's hit series Tiger Cubs, and his reputation largely intact. He was the Teflon Don of the scandal. Nothing stuck. And what of the verdict for Rose Chan? For the victim, there was no moving on. In the eyes of the industry, she became radioactive. She was no longer the promising action star. She was the girl from the Benny Chan incident. The scandal became her surname. Directors and producers, wary of drama, hesitated to cast her. The psychological toll of being molested, then gaslighted, then pressured into silence, derailed her momentum. She had won the apology, but she had lost her career trajectory. The final verdict of the Rose Chan scandal is a bitter pill to swallow. It taught the world that in the ecosystem of power, an apology is a currency that can buy immunity. It proved that if you are famous enough, and if you have a wife willing to cry or stand tall for you, you can assault a woman in public and walk away with your life intact. Benny Chan lost his Duan Yu image, but kept his career. Jo Ma kept everything. And Rose Chan? She was left with the memories, the trauma, and the hollow victory of a sorry that changed absolutely nothing. The system had protected its own, and the wolf was free to hunt another day. More than a decade has passed since the shutter clicks pierced the night air of Hengdian. The scandal redrew the maps of 3 lives, illustrating the cruel and uneven distribution of consequences in the ecosystem of power. For Benny Chan, the scandal marked the death of Duan Yu. While the press conference saved him from prison, he became a punchline in Hong Kong. Exiled from mainstream cinema, he pivoted to the mainland market, starring in low-quality but commercially successful web movies like the Ji Gong series. He traded dignity for cash. Disturbingly, he rebuilt his image by constructing a fortress of domesticity. In 5 years, his wife underwent 4 C-sections, a feat critics labeled as a frantic PR campaign to bury the memory of the predator under a mountain of family portraits. In stark contrast, Tak-chung proved that silence is golden. Aided by the stoic defense of his wife and his cold betrayal of Benny, Ma detached himself from the wreckage entirely. He returned to TVB, donned the police uniform for the hit series Tiger Cubs, and successfully edited himself out of the narrative. He remains the Teflon Don, the man to whom nothing sticks. And finally, Rose Chan. For the victim, there was no franchise waiting. The Wolf Kiss scandal became her surname. Directors hesitated to cast baggage, and producers feared the drama. She had won the apology but lost her career trajectory. While her predators rebuilt their empires, she faded from the spotlight, a casualty of a night she never asked for. The legacy of the Hengdian scandal is a bitter realization. It serves as a precursor to the hashtag #MeToo movement, yet lacks the catharsis of justice. It proved that in the battle between a beloved idol and a teenage girl, the system will protect its own. Benny Chan reinvented himself, Ma remained untouchable, and Rose Chan paid the price. The camera lens may capture the crime, but as this story proves, visual evidence alone does not guarantee justice.